Good afternoon. Well, welcome back from lunch. I hope we all had a great time. People who are joining us from their respective locations virtually, thank you as well. And we are welcome to the third session of the day. And we are out of time, so we're just going to jump right in so that we can make time in a hurry, especially as our member of faculty, Mr. Tolu Aderemi, has been waiting for us for a while now. So our last session for today is corporate governance. And speaking to us is Mr. Tolu Aderemi, partner, Perchstone Graeys. Not just that, but he's an amazing personality. He has leadership roles in several of the organizations that we know of. And he's also a John Taylor Scholar from the University of Aberdeen. So I've known him for many years, and I like to tell people the first time that I met him, we don't have time for that, but I'll just tell you something small. So it was years ago, I was doing my court attachment at the Federal High Court in Abuja, and I had a habit of meeting people that were lawyers. And he just walked into court, and he had this swag. And I was like, who is this, this great guy? I'd like to meet him. So I met him, and he's been a big brother and a mentor ever since. So it's a big honor for me to have him here speak to us today. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Please, Mr. Tolu Aderemi, speaking on corporate governance. A round of applause. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, and we are honored to have you speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adedumade, and good afternoon to everyone. Unfortunately, we're starting rather late, but I think within the short time that we have, we'll try and make best out of it. But I have two problems, and I will do two problems with you. I trust you can help. The first problem is it's difficult to speak like this at large. So whilst Adedumade kept me waiting, I also tried to grab a few things. And then secondly, it's also difficult when you're speaking virtually, in an environment where technology is not absolute. So those two reasons, we might have one or two itches. And if in case we do, forgive us. We will try as much as possible to minimize the strain. And as regards timing, I will also try and speed up what it is that we're going to be discussing at an interactive session. We can finish, we can release you on time, and I can also jump out of here as quickly as possible. And so with those few opening words, I think we need to start. I always like an intro. So let me start with the who is just sitting now in the wine, and yes, you're looking at me. Can you? I don't know. Is there a way we can interact? Do we have a microphone?
Yes, we have a microphone, and we can hear you as clearly as you can hear us.
Okay, so there's a lady who is sitting down. I'd like her to be the first client.
Which of the
ladies? Can you give her the microphone? Oh, the one opening the bottled water.
I have a feeling she'll have dropped the bottled water.
She's seated opposite. She's seated opposite the lady in the yellow dress. That lady, she's looking at me. She's opposite the lady in the yellow dress. The lady in yellow dress is beside you.
Yes, so that is you.
That's the lady. Give her. Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Aderemi. Yeah, my name is Pete Okay.
Okay, thanks, Miss Okay.
Yeah.
I know that I don't know whether law is your first degree or is your second degree. I also don't have the skill to know how rich you are, but I know that you must be so rich. But years of experience as a lawyer, have you had the privilege to set up a company before, either for yourself or for somebody? Have you had that privilege before?
Yeah, yes, sir. I've set up a company.
You set up your company before?
Not for myself, for someone.
Or for someone? All right, okay. But in that experience, in setting up that company, somebody approached you to say, look, I have an idea and I want to, I probably want to start trading. Ado is doing now and making a lot of money. What this person has.
Sorry, sir, can you come in? I didn't get that.
Person registered a company for what you describe the person as the owner of the business. Is that correct?
Yes, like the owner of the business approached you to register a company.
Yes, sir.
As the owner of the business.
Yes.
In most cases, you all discover that person is also the one driving or running business.
Yes, sir.
All right. And sometimes, which is part of the problem startup company today, when it comes to preparing a balance sheet. So sometimes it's difficult for that person, even when he brings in other shareholders. Well, don't let me start using those words. When he brings other people to join in that company, it's difficult sometimes to listen to instructions or to take directives because he registered the name and at the same time, he's the one running the company and the account of the company is exclusive to him or her.
Yes,
Has that been your experience?
yes, sir.
So again, that's my experience as well. And I just want to be sure that my experience is not exclusive. So with this small scenario, I'm sure you've heard of corporate governance many times. Some people use it loosely, some people use it correctly, some people use it incorrectly. But in your own view, what do you think corporate governance, what do you think it means in the context of this scenario I just discussed?
Actually, my idea of corporate governance is quite beautiful. I think, excuse me, I think it has to do with fairness, the internal fairness of organization. Yeah, let me just with equity of an organization, especially among shareholders and more especially among minority shareholders.
All right, thank you very much. Let me take one more person and then let's shoot. There's a gentleman at the back, gray suit. I don't know, you can just pick anybody at random so that I don't misspeak people. The gentleman is at the back, he's in a gray suit. I think he's wearing, yes, that's you, yes, you're raising the hand. Please give him the microphone. I think I'm trying with my eyes. And that's the beauty of technology. Yes, sir. Okay. So just tell me, using the same scenario we've just described, what's your concept? Those companies you've registered for people, what's your concept of corporate governance? Do you think it plays any role in those companies?
Yes, I think I do.
Go ahead, sir.
I established corporate governance in the sense that I'm not the owner and at the same time wholly controlling the company. There are people doing different aspects of the job or the running of the organization. That's the major plank of corporate governance in the organization I've registered.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And the first lady, I thank you too. I think both of you have made excellent or demonstrate excellent understanding of corporate governance. And it's not rocket science, nothing esoteric, it is not a difficult concept. And that was why I thought, let's simplify it as much as we can. It is what we all deal with every day, is what we're dealing with going forward. Even in our homes, for those of you that are married, there's also corporate governance in the homes, but I won't go into all of that. And so go straight to my slides. I think I have, Adedomade has eaten into my time. I have about 1 hour and 30 minutes or thereabout. So we'll see how much of this we can take in the next hour and a half. And so I've described corporate governance to mean a system of rules, practices, and processes by which a firm, a company, an institution, an entity is directed and controlled. Now, if I stay with just this definition, I think I would have spoken extensively and exhaustively to what corporate governance means, what it entails, and even some of the challenges that companies have with absence of corporate governance. And so, but take two words out of it, by which a company is directed and controlled. And you can see that the key words there is that a company must be directed by someone and a company must be controlled by another person. And I'll come to that very shortly. I've also said it involves the balancing of the interest of a company's many stakeholders. Now, before now, and if you look at the scenario we have just painted, the scenario simply speaks to one man who has, registered the company, and if he's well educated enough, it will bring in other people, and they will separate the roles where you have those that will be called shareholders. Now let's start using the lingo. Those that will be called shareholders and those that will be called direct. But I think the concept of corporate governance in this context has gone beyond those two people. And when you start looking at things of how companies now need to raise money, raise international financing, then you start speaking to the global ESG requirements for companies in terms of sustainability. And corporate governance is one of the key elements of it. So applying or implementing corporate governance is no longer between just two persons anymore. The obligation has now gone beyond those two people. And then you have more and more people. You have financiers, you have government, you have the stakeholders, you have many people that are now part of the business, whether directly or indirectly. And because of this, these companies or the directors of these companies now have an obligation which goes beyond just their shareholders, but to senior management, to customers, like I said, financiers, executives, and government, and indeed the community. The concept of corporate governance is a bit more pronounced in some sectors more than some others. And so when you look at the extractive industry, for instance, you will discover that in that industry, two things are paramount. One is that it deals directly with the environment and therefore the consequences of their operations to the environment. And so stakeholder, community stakeholder engagement has become so important that it took the federal government almost enact an act host community for the oil and gas industry. And so that this gives you a slightly, enhanced understanding of why corporate governance has now, or is now being taken very seriously. Of course, quite apart from the fact that if you want to now raise money internationally, one of the key things beyond ESG is that you also have very strong corporate governance principles. And this is to speak to what I mentioned earlier, control and ownership, which are called direct and control. I've also defined it as a method used to govern businesses and their goals. Every organization has a goal. I mean, if I were to look around this room and ask you, and for me, periodically, I like my classes to be very interactive. So I will start looking at you for some answers. I see a lady in a yellow dress. She's probably going to answer my next question. So when you look at companies, you discover that companies, they have mission statements, they have vision, they have goals, they have aims, they have objectives. Now, these objectives are implemented by certain people. Those people that will implement the objectives must also do so using certain ethos. They must do so using certain guidelines, and they must have a reporting structure so that they're also accountable to the people who own the business. And lastly, I said the definition is to make those in the management of companies more accountable. Exactly what I've just said now. So you can tell that the essence of corporate governance. Can we go to the next slide? The essence of corporate governance is really focused on your first is the structure of how your business is run, and then secondly, your interaction. You can call it your fiduciary duty as a director of a company to not only your shareholders now, but to even third parties. And like I said, the third parties have now been expanded. So you have government, you have communities, etc., and even financiers, who are part of it. And so the essence of corporate governance, like I did say earlier, its full essence is really to speak to how a company is directed and by who. So you have two key players in the company, which was what the lady and the gentleman helped us with at the start. You have your shareholders and you have your directors. These two guys play key roles in the success or the failures of a company. And so your shareholders are those that are usually described as the owners, whilst your directors are those that are described as those being in control of administration of the company. But both of them, no, go to the previous slide. But both of them have their respective objectives. And so the objective of the shareholder is really to build a long and lasting and sustaining legacy of a business. So that gentleman who asked the lady in the maroon top to set up had a focus of what he wants or he wanted to do with the company. And so doing that, what they also will do, because they can't implement it by themselves, they will now set up or constitute the board of directors through whom they can implement objectives. And that's how it works. Now, these directors themselves also have their own objectives. And so sometimes the objectives of the directors and the shareholders, they conflict. And so then you now have a disagreement. And I will give you some scenario examples towards the end of this presentation to see why it's always important for the objectives of both the shareholders and the directors. And let me give you an example of how the directors can want to run with the objectives. So one of the objectives is to pay directors bonuses at the year, which most of you in the law firms, you're law firm owners, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't own the law firm, you also know what I'm talking about because you get this paid to you. Now, the decision to pay this bonus comes with certain things. And so the objective of the director is to pay, is to ensure people to raise money to pay bonuses. Whichever way it decides to do it now becomes his entire initiative. And so the director might decide to say, look, you know what, let me cut corners or let me cut costs. So for example, the director might decide to cut costs, on technology, the use of technology. He might decide to cut costs on research and development and say, look, we have so much, on these lawyers here. Let's reduce what we spend, what's been the outcome. Now, to do all of this, what certainly happens is that you save more money and then you can post more profit. If you post more profit, you are able to distribute dividends or you're able to pay bonuses to the directors. Now, if you look at this, it means the directors have either been able to work harder than they used to, and by so doing, they have been able to make more money, or they have cut down on cost. and then they have been able to generate more profits and for them to be able to pay bonuses. But this might not be the long-term objective of the shareholders. So the shareholders might be looking at a more environmentally friendly objective, which the company will carry out, even though they will make money, but money will be long-term income for the company and not a short-term procedure that will quickly earn them additional income bonuses. See the way both parties are thinking. Their objectives are the same, but how they work towards the objective is different. And this is why the essence of corporate governance is how the directors or how the company itself is run, what we normally call the checks and the balances. And so that takes me to the next slide. Typically, yes. So typically, board structures, which again, most of you may be familiar with, are usually in two ways. There's one way that is not as common, so many of us may not be familiar with it. The second way is what we're all familiar with, but I think it's important that we have an understanding of the two possibilities. The first structure, which is the multi-tier structure, is prevalent in the US. So you have a number of blue chip companies that are structured in this manner, and that's the multi-tier structure. So the multi-tier structure has two layers of governance approach. One is you have the supervisory board, and secondly, you have the management board. Now, the supervisory board under the multi-tier structure will essentially be composed of non-executive directors. And the importance of this is that at that level, you don't want to have anybody who is in core operations to be taking decisions at that level. And so because you are non-operational and you are representing the interest of the shareholders, the way and manner you will take decisions will be objective and will be really in the best interest of the shareholders. And those are the guys who sit in the supervisory board. In the management board, this is where you have your head of HR, you have your head of accounts, you have your auditors, you have all the various heads, that play operational role, in the company. And it is in that board, that they sit and make decisions. That board is the one we're most familiar with. But the challenge with this structure is that it means that at every point in time, you don't have in one room, all the brilliant minds and all the brilliant heads, making submissions into a particular issue before the company takes a decision. That's just the only challenge that you have there. But the plus to it is that you also have a decision-making process where it's just like in the oil industry where you have the MARCOM and where you have the OPCOM. The management committee is MARCOM, the OPCOM is the operations committee, I think, and where you take the final decision, at MARCOM. And executive directors, by their very nature, sometimes can be bullish because they have the power of the resources, and so when you put them in the same room sometimes with non-executive directors, there's a slight tendency for them to be a bit overbearing, to be a bit bullish and just to have their way, because they would have thought, through the projects they want to embark upon, they would have done the feasibility studies, and unless you have a superior argument or a superior reasoning, it may be difficult for you, to be able to overturn their views. Meanwhile, the EDs are people who are distant from, all that you have done, but they will look at the issues dispassionately, they will look at it fairly, and more importantly, what is in the overall interest of the shareholders. And so that is why that structure sometimes, may be very attractive. But guess what? The problem also with it is that you will now have too many meetings. So the supervisory board is holding a meeting, the management board is holding a meeting, and sometimes there's no convergence of mind between the two separate boards to be able to. So Under the multi-tier structure, sometimes there are issues which sometimes are needless. Let's go to the one that we're more familiar with, which is the unitary board. Single board, and in that single board, you have the EDs and you have the non-EDs. It makes decision-making faster. It makes decision-making a bit more robust. And then it helps with the operations of a company. And under the unitary board, I think, and that's my view, that corporate governance actually works better because it's not a structure that really accommodates by its very nature corporate governance principles. And so any company who is a unitary board structure, who has a unitary board structure, and who is able to implement these corporate governance principles, then would have been, would have succeeded as a company. Next slide. All right, the man who is controlling this has just had lunch too. All right, so this slide typically speaks to all I've been talking about since. And I think if there's nothing you will take away from here, I think this is one thing that should be taken away. The importance of who owns what, and who does what in a business. And so in a company, you have, look at on my left, you have 6 gentlemen, 3 gentlemen and 3 ladies. And then if you look at my right, you have, I can't count the number of them. I'm sure they're 20 or 30. The people on my right, the owners of the business, these are the shareholders. It may be that some of the 6 on my left are also part of the mammoth crowd on the right. But all of the people in the right, they constitute those who own the company. And these are the people on whose behalf their objectives the board of directors must implement. They own the vision for the company. My friend who told me about the guy who she helped register the company, those guys that gave you that instruction, they fall within the right category. But then some of them might also be the left. And so those guys in the left are now the guys you have entrusted the wheels of controlling the company and driving the business to success into their hands. But the challenge we have sometimes is that the guys who are on the right, particularly those who are not owners of the business, sometimes get carried away because they really don't understand or don't realize that they are trustees of the business. So they hold the assets of the company in trust for the guys who are the owners of the business. And therefore, there's a fiduciary duty conferred upon them for them to act in a certain way. And that way can only be in the interest of the business and nothing more. And so therefore, if you sit in any of the driving seats on the left-hand side, all the decisions you make can only be for the interest of the company and not in your personal interest. And I think that's an important point on this. Next slide. All right. And so part of what I've been talking about, and many of you might be thinking, or might now have been, guessing that, wow, okay, this corporate governance thing is, and it applies to everything we're doing as lawyers. In fact, as lawyers, almost all of you here, and Nigeria is good, we have a combine of solicitors and barristers. So we combine both, unlike what happens in the UK. So in your day-to-day activity, even if you're a core litigator, you would have at some point or the other been faced with basic company registration, and then you would have been involved in drafting of a memorandum and article of association. These are documents that are very important when it comes to our corporate governance. So why is it important? The slide that I've just shown you is a divorce, what I call a corporate divorce between ownership and control of a business. And that is what corporate governance comes, to set out. In no unmistaken terms, it creates those Chinese walls. So the business owners are different. Those that are in control must be different. And then you have checks and balances. What it also does is that it engenders trust and confidence in the business, particularly from third parties or potential investors. And so, for example, there's a movie that I've been watching in more recent times. It's called Designated Survivor. I'm sure a few of you would have watched it. So I watch it between 2 and 3 a.m. every morning. I just watched an episode. And that movie just gives me a clear understanding of what governance and the limitation of governance, what it's about. So you discover that that movie, the president of the United States of America, wants to order Americans should go to war. Or no, the head of FBI, or whatever it's called, wants to go to war. The president does not want to go to war because he doesn't have enough reasons to go to war. And the man is saying, look, he has to direct him to go to war. He doesn't have a discretion in that scenario. And so this is how companies must be governed. So in your respective offices, you have your managing partner, or you have other partners in the firm. Who is in charge of what? So you have a partner who's in charge of finance. You have a partner who's in charge of HR, even though you have a head of HR. You have a partner who's in charge of research and development. Now, each of them have their different rules, and I must be able to check what the other person is doing. All of us must be working towards, the same cause. Corporate governance makes provision for accountability. Or put it, it sets up an accountability framework. And so if you're in the academia, you'll be familiar with what I call peer review work. And so the best article you can ever write is an article that is reviewed, because your peers would have critiqued it, looking at the best resource or resources. And whatever work comes out, or whatever comes out as a review of it, you can be rest assured that must be excellent. So in anything you're doing, either as a director, you must have it at the back of your mind that, look, I'm accountable to some people. And once you have that accountability attitude in you, then running that business to profitability, can only just be the only consequence of it. And I say it promotes integrity quite naturally. It promotes excellent framework, effective collaboration, and then long-term profitable enterprise. Once you work within certain parameters, you will discover that the objectives of directors and the objectives of the shareholders will align. The non-alignment of the objectives of both parties is what creates problems in companies. That's why companies they collapse. And I say position companies to access or for access to investment, productive collaboration. In today's market, for those who are advising or who advise companies that are raising funds internationally, if you were part of the Dangote refinery project, you would realize how much of corporate governance has been infused into that company, because it was one of the big concerns, or no concerns, one of the big things the investors looked at and will still continue to look at in investing in your company. Nobody wants to put money into a company where, and this is why it's important that this lecture and Ado-Ekiti is something to think about. That startup companies, most of whom may be your client, must also take a lecture like this, because the fact that you have set up a company does not necessarily mean you must, sit in the driving position. In fact, part of the code of conduct for public companies is that the CEO and the chairman of a public company must be separate and distinct entities. And without knowing, once you're able to infuse some of these principles into your business, then you become an attractive bride, to foreign investors, because they are more comfortable, with the structure of your business. They can understand the structure of your business. Dispute resolution is also a big part of it. But Ado-Ekiti has ensured tactfully that I don't speak on that. So I will take that out. But those two key parts, your potential investor wants to be sure, because what it does is that it guarantees the return on investment of that investment, whether you give it at 9%, 15%, those are things the economists will put together. But it guarantees him that, look, there is a methodology by which this company is run, and there's an accountability framework. So I really have no difficulties, and it can only lead you to productive collaboration between the two owners of the business. Next slide. And so I may have answered this question, but in your mind, a lot of things may be going on. All right, so when I leave this room today and tomorrow morning I get an instruction, or there's an instruction I'm currently working on, all this question of corporate governance, whose duty is it? Whose responsibility is it? Is it that of the lawyer? No, go to the previous slide. Yes, thank you. Is it that of the lawyer, or is it that of directors, or is it that of the shareholders? Whose duty really is the question of corporate governance, so that it helps you. And as lawyers, I must say, SARS and MA, as lawyers, you must, in the matter of start guiding lines along the lines. So you need to sit the board of directors of your company, the companies advising, sit them, we sat down with one, and you will discover many things. One, we sat with the board last week of one of the big oil corporations, who mentioned his name. And in the course of discussing what their fiduciary duties are under corporate governance structures, they even realized that they have not even incorporated that company. There was a change of name, and they've not effected that change of name. So these are some of the things that will come out when you are speaking about corporate governance principles, because it makes conversation between the shareholders and the owners of the business a bit more fluid and flexible. But whose responsibility is it? It is that of the board of directors. You must set out the framework. What's the role of the shareholders in this? They are to set up the board. In some companies, and I dare say most companies now, whether you are big or whether you are small, I know the issue of cost might come into this in terms of those people that you engage. But auditors must be part of every organization, whether it's big, whether it's small. And the reason is because on the one hand, your accountant is managing or operating your books, or in some cases, you, the owner, you are the ones operating the books. You need an auditor who is able to check and query certain things. Certain expenditures have been made. Where is the approval for this sort of expenditures? You must be able to call to question certain actions of the executive, of the directors. That is what informs good corporate governance principles. So the shareholders' job really is to set up, the BOD. In some cases, is to also appoint the auditors. And once they've done that, they would have satisfied themselves, that they already have put in the structure in place. Next slide. And so you ask me, what are their responsibilities? Your clients might ask you, okay, this corporate governance you are talking about, look, I own this company. What are you doing? You bring another man to come and help. You need to explain what the broader picture is, what the broader view is, and let the clients know that, look, the board of directors, they have a key responsibility to doing quite a number of things. One is to set the aims and objectives of the company. You see, I've realized in the course of my career that the absence or the lack of clarity, in the governance of a company. Yesterday afternoon, I was advising a client who came here, and the client is a Nigerian Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I got lost in between there. So there were no pay slips to justify that, and they refused that application. And the basis of the refusal was basically because you couldn't explain, the movement of monies from a corporate account into a private account. So you see, the objectives of a company must be set out very clearly by the board of directors. In their strategic sessions, they are also to determine the strategy by which those objectives are to be met, because they will be called to give an account of why they have failed or how they have succeeded. And in doing this, they have to provide leadership, and leadership at different strata. So you have leadership at the MD's level, you have leadership at the various heads of departmental level. So the leadership must trickle all the way down. And in trickling down, you're also introducing supervisory models into it. So within the board of directors themselves, you can see that there's also corporate governance there. So the MDs, depending on what layers you try to introduce, you start checking what the next level officer is doing. And all of essentially means that at the end of the day, you will be able to be in a good position, to render your account of stewardship to your shareholders, which is the essence of why a company is set up, really. So it's really not just set up for profit. Profit is good, don't get me wrong, but to achieve the objectives of the owners of the company. And where you fail to do so, then you pay prices. Next slide. Right. Before I go to the benefits, so that I like to make this interactive a little bit, let me take two quick questions. And if you don't have questions, I have one question and I'll call on anybody, so that I'm sure that we're all together. Can I take two quick questions? Anybody? Anybody, do we have anybody with a question?
Nobody with a question at this time, sir, from the room. I don't think anybody is raising their hand virtually either.
All right, okay, so let's move ahead. So what are the benefits of a corporate governance? And don't worry, this topic is a topic that it's a first class. A class that when you finish, I've given my slides to Aderemi, so you will share with everybody. You can really use it as a resource tool or material, for further studies. It's an extensive and expansive area, but it's a very good one that every commercial lawyer, must have good grasp of. And guess what? Once you understand it, in fact, there's a bigger part of it which we can deal with today, which is the ESG obligations of companies. That part of it, every director, every member of the board of directors wants to listen to you. And as lawyers, you can make more money from it, away from the regular, meetings that you schedule, the notices you issue, etc. I always say, colleagues in the office, when you come for board meetings, I sit on a few boards. When I sit as the director of a board, it is different from when I sit, as secretary of the board, or when I sit as a lawyer who is observing. What is important is you are bringing something that is different, onto the board. Apologies, one of my partners distracted me here. All right, so
sorry to interrupt you, but there's someone here that says they would like you to make a clarification on something.
Yes, go ahead.
On many boards, the NEDs seems to have superiority over the executive directors.
In your what?
on many boards, in many boards, you have the NEDs, non-executive directors, and then the executive directors. The NEDs seem to have superiority over the executive directors. What's your take on this? Especially when there are issues where there are disagreements. And don't forget, the chairman is also an NED.
I would have loved to see the face of who asked that question. That's a very brilliant question. Now, where that came was the multi-tier structure. So if you were following when I was on that slide, when I was speaking about the multi-tier structure and the unitary structure, that is where that came from. So the original concept really is that your non-executive directors must have superiority over the executive directors. And so the non-executive, the executive director, they report to the non-executive directors. The reason is very simple. The executive directors, in some cases, are not owners of the business. And so they are in the business, quote and unquote, to make money. And so the sort of decisions that they take will reflect their objective in a company. And so under that multi-tier system, what you find is that whatever decision you take at the management board, so it's called the management board level, that decision is subject to further approval of the non-executive director, who, by the way, represents the interest of the shareholders. In some cases, you may be lucky where you have the MD of the company who is also a shareholder. And let me give you an example. So now look at First Bank. I'm sure a number of you will be familiar with the drama, we had with First Bank recently, where CBN had to dissolve the board and all what you have. In that circumstance, the MD of the company also doubled as quote and unquote a part owner of the company, because it was seconded by the central bank, who was protecting the interest of the shareholders. Unfortunately, in that business, the chairman of the company, who is also supposed to be a part owner or a majority owner of the business, quote and unquote, was playing boardroom gimmicks. I don't want to use some other adjectives. And so this is where it's important that you must hive or separate both of them and get the guys whose objectives are operational, day-to-day operational, and whose objectives is to make money. Let me just use those words. And if you follow the example I gave earlier, an objective of the board is to make money. The shareholders have also set up the company. I mean, some can set it up for charity, but those who don't set up for charity also want to make money, but maybe not in the way the executive directors want to make money. And so the EDs might decide to say, look, you know what? Either way, we must pay profit, because they're paying themselves profit anyway, if you think about it. And so how do I make more money and I'm able to pay bonuses? I can do it out of two ways: getting more business so that the business gets more money, or I cut down on cost. So where I send people to America or to OTC or to Paris for training, I cut out on all those. The sort of technology we invest in, I cut down on them. I'm able to save more money. And then maybe I get in some underhand practices or some sharp practices. I mean, some of which, a number of us are familiar with, particularly in the oil and gas industry. So any of those things you can do, you will make money. And then you're able to pay bonuses. But that procedure, that process is unsustainable and is not what's the objective of the shareholder. So while the shareholders also want to make money, not in that pattern. And so for me, and something we've been advocating more recent times, that maybe for responsibility's sake, and particularly because some of directors, are not disciplined. And so when there's a lack of discipline, then you need to go back to that two-layer structure where you subject it to, and when you put a man, they always say, once you are in a transaction and the question of money is out of it, your sense of judgment is not blurred. It's just like a corrupt judge. If a judge is already compromised, there's nothing he's going to see. He's just going walking towards an answer. And that is the problem. So we make, I mean, let's see how much of it we can push, to have that multi-tier structure. All right. So benefits of corporate governance. Again, now that we know what it means, now that we know is whose responsibility it is, does it have any direct benefit? One of the most important benefits, as I'm concerned, is that it increases your access to external financing, particularly for public companies, because the essence of a company is growth. And so what most people don't realize most times is that there are certain, it's like success. The principles of success, they are the same everywhere in the world. How you approach them may be different, but the principles are. And so one of the principles of success of a company where you want to raise external funding is compliance with international financial reporting standards in your accounting. A number of companies don't have it. But once you infuse the corporate governance principles into your system, you now must have it. Again, I talked about the ESG. You must also have ESG principles embedded in your own code of practice. And quite naturally, once you do that, the moment you think of expanding, the moment you think of raising external funding, when they look at the status or the stature of your company, it becomes very easy for them to see that, look, this company is quite compliant. I was discussing with someone the other time out of the country, and they were saying, look, what is all this ESG nonsense talking about? I say it's as basic as in a law firm, they would ask, what's the procedure of how you trash your paper? How much of paper do you still use in your office? How green have you gone? All of these, like you will know, is tied towards this question about 2020, net zero emission obligation under the Paris Agreement. But that's not what we're discussing anyway. But somehow, some of these principles have found their way into our corporate culture. And so companies don't run the way they normally should run anymore. They are now guided and bound by certain principles that they are not ordinarily used to before. But what's the good news is that once you infuse this into your system, you start operating like an internationally accepted company. And you can benchmark your standards and structures, by those companies. You also have low cost of capital. There was a transaction we got involved in. It became so, the loan is one. The cost of that loan became so huge. And it was so huge because the company had no structure, had no reporting standards, had no accountability structure. And they're operating somewhere in the Niger Delta. Their operations would materially affect the community. And so this company that was putting in money into it was to enhance the business, but the risks were huge. And so it changed his mind from equity to loan. And of course, like once you are putting money into it, there's what is called the cost of the loan, or cost of capital. But once you have this structure as I have prescribed, then you see that though sometimes it's even not a non-existence. And then it makes operational performance a lot better. You have guidance structures, you have different things that guides you in the operations of your company. And once you do that, inevitably it helps with the valuation of your company. It helps with the share performance of your company. Some people use this in the negative sense. And I will come to that when I want to talk about, insider trading. But when you put together these structures and you are meticulous about how it is done and faithful and disciplined with its implementation, you'll discover your company will the rating of your company will go high. And quite naturally,
All right, sorry about this slight delay. I don't think it's from our side, as everything seems to be working from there, but he's back on now.
Okay, I must go and find out whether, I hope the person who is in charge of technology in my office has also not cut corners with the cost of technology. This one, they are logging me out and bringing me back in. So essentially, I was talking about the startup companies. They ask you to bring your balance sheet, you start running around. And sometimes they say, look, I can't pay an accountant to prepare books and accounts for me. No. If there's good corporate governance in your business, all you have, when you talk of balance sheets, there are esoteric terms. Go and print your statement of account. In your statement of account, they will help you pull out the profit and losses there. They will look at what comes in, they look at what goes out. Not many people, in fact, even in this room, I'm not excluded, can say, look, let me print out my balance, my statement of account, and I subject it to analysis. And that is why when, just to digress a bit, when EFCC arrests people for financial crimes, the first thing they do before they arrest you is that they call for your statement of account. And they start doing what is called analysis. For 3 weeks, 3 months, they may not call you because they're looking at how money is coming and they're looking at where you're spending the money. That is all what balance sheet is about. And so once you have a proper corporate governance structure, if money comes in, where it goes to becomes a mere tea party. It's not going to worry you at all because certain things have been put in place and you have a third party, maybe not necessarily an auditor. It might be a partner who every expenditure of the company is subjected to. They ask questions. Next slide. Right. How do you know you have good corporate governance issues in your principles, I beg your pardon, in your company? And how does the board achieve this? One, once you can feel and you know that there's a structure of accountability within your business. Today, Mr. Adedumade has organized, this resourceful training. I'm almost going to assure you that once we finish this 2-day training, he will go back to the books because he's accountable to his shareholders. And so he needs to look at how much has this training cost? How much did we realize? How much did all of you pay to join this training? And then you net off that cost. The cost must be reasonable cost. In some cases, it may have an approval of the board for all the cost of this training. In some other cases, it may not have. It may get a ratification much later. But there's that accountability structure. He can't take all the money that is paid today, and when all of you leave, he just goes to Vibe and says they should give him Glen 21. It's 198,000 naira. And because he knows nobody's going to ask him, I'm the alpha and the omega of my business, the business will never go beyond what it is. And so that accountability structure, which is tied to transparency, but there's no way you can be accountable and not be transparent. And so I call it corporate nakedness. It's a difficult thing, I must say, so don't get me wrong. Sometimes as individuals, sometimes I myself, as Tolu Aderemi, I query some of my expenses. I query them. I like to wear glasses, recommended glasses, but I like frames. And so I might like walking through the airport, I see a nice frame. I just like the frames, I just buy it. Now, it's my personal account. It's my personal money. But I should be accountable even to myself on how I'm spending that money. I have 4 frames already, whether it's bifocals, whether it's multifocal, whatever it is called. What is the need to buy this one? I think that's where it starts from. And so once you can query yourself, then it becomes easy. Or in a home, as the man, I mean, I use this example all the time. A woman collects money for housing, a monthly allowance from the husband. She doesn't give account. What she says is, look, the money was never enough anyway. I added my money to my wife all the time. Okay, give me an account of what I'm prepared to put more, but let me know what you have spent it on. accountability, transparency. So imagine at a micro level, and I'm sure almost all of us in this room are guilty of that. At that micro level, how bad it can be when it's at a macro level. But once you can establish those indices, fairness will come in, and then naturally you will become responsible because you don't see all your operations as operations towards your own objective, as I said earlier, but towards objectives of the owners of the business. And you remember that you are a trustee holding these assets in trust for other people. How do you achieve this? I've said it many times, good board practices. On the board, you must have, I mean, I see a number of big companies with having an audit company. What's the big deal? You need an internal auditor, you need an external auditor. Because that way, the finance status of your company before. I see some companies, they have two accounts. Sometimes I'm a director in a company. One particular year, they brought two accounts. I said, what for? Oh, they said one deals with the full, the reality or the real figures made by the company. That one is for tax purposes. The other one is for tax purposes. I said, no, it can't be, not at a board meeting. And on that basis, we fired the auditor who approved that. Many law firms, I'm sorry to say, even today, don't even pay their proper taxes. When we started it in my firm, it was very painful. You pay as much as 300,000, 350,000, 400,000 as taxes. I mean, whatever government does with it is a different matter. But within your organization, as far as you are concerned, it is proper corporate governance structure. So once they look at yours, certain taxes will be applied. The same way allowances are applied. Why should our allowance apply to taxes should not apply? It's painful, but when you are disciplined about it, I think you're going to be all right. And ultimately, the business will grow. We were bidding for a project, one of the federal government projects some time ago. One of the conditions was to submit our tax incidents as a company. We didn't have to go and start running up and down to say, oh, look, let's quickly cook the books, because all this is. And so as lawyers, first, that's something we need to start imbibing. Secondly, we need to start educating the clients as to what is important that they must be doing. And so if they can afford, they should also have a tax advisor. So beyond the internal and external auditors, we have a Perchstone Graeys, we also have a tax advisor, because sometimes the tax man can also be crazy anyway and start applying. Look, very interesting. This is a letter that was served to me today by LIRS, assessing me to some silly taxes. You know, what they just do is go to your LinkedIn, pick random companies, and then just start assessing you to taxes. But because of good corporate governance structures, it was minuted to me from the accounts department. And I was asked to justify where this income is. That's from within my firm. Because my firm also knows all my income is different from your salary. And so when you get this sort of letter, they will query you. It doesn't matter if you're a partner or not. Because your actions or inactions may directly or indirectly affect the business of the firm. And I think that speaks to all the other points here: disclosure and transparency, and of course, by extension, shareholders' rights. So let's move quickly to the next slide. Right. I have talked either directly or indirectly about these three entities. I think they are most important in every company. Most times you have two, you don't have a third one. So you have your board of directors, which is, like I said, I have been saying it's the body which the assets of the company are entrusted to. Board of directors are trustees of companies. They don't own those assets. They hold it on behalf of the owners of those assets. And therefore, the care and management. So we talk about duty of care all the time, the fiduciary duty of the members of the board. This is where it comes from. And so the care and management of the assets and affairs of the company are vested in the board. It has been entrusted into their care for them to manage it properly on behalf of the real owners of the business. And then the shareholders are the owners of the company, like I have said, who exercise those powers at their annual general meetings. And as you have said, is the shareholders meeting one of the company's primary governance vehicles. So it's at this meeting, like many of you will know, where sometimes the board of directors may have taken certain decisions within their powers. Sometimes it may be outside of their powers, but it became necessary to take those decisions in the interest of the business. And once it is the interest of the business, you can come back, do your AGM, and come to ratify it. But the last one is the audit committee. Read what I put here. It is one of the major operating committees of the company's BOD that oversees financial reporting and disclosures. It oversees the audit process and the company's system of internal control and compliance with laws and regulations. Most people run away from it. You think people just run away from compliance officers? No, they run from auditor. Even auditor within your organization. When the auditor in Perchstone Graeys comes into the office, sometimes it's war because he's querying this, he's querying that, and he's not able. And that is why when I see sometimes I see some books on account and I see wrong information imputed in it, and you have an auditor stamp, that auditor should go to jail because you must be an independent assessor of the health of the company. But most companies try to move away from it. But for you to have imbibed in you good corporate governance principles, you need to have, these three, not any three. The three must be in place. Next slide. And I'm going to start rushing now. All right. Now, this part is very important. In fact, the next three slides, I think in the next three slides, I talked about the challenges of what I call corporate practices, the fiduciary duty of a director. Okay, I've said it before, I think it's another part that you must take, seriously, and you will need to speak to your clients about it. What is the duty? What is my duty as a director? What is your duty as a director in this company? The paramount and overall duty, one is loyalty to the cause of the business, to the aims and the objectives of the shareholders, and to act in the best interest of the company. And you see I put it here, and its shareholders. I think is the most important. You have no business on that board if you do not agree by this duty of loyalty. And of course, by extension, the duty of care as a trustee. You must exercise reasonable care, skill, and diligence in all the decisions you make. None of your decisions or none of the director's decisions must be tainted, with fraud or personal interest. And under all circumstances, there must be disclosure. It may happen that a director or somebody has bidded for a contract, and has a relationship with the director. When it comes to public companies, the parameters are different and they're a bit more stringent, But for non-quoted companies, sometimes disclosure, can cure it. But what is important is even if disclosure will cure it, you must be seen to act in good faith. Next slide. Right. I've just talked about conflict of interest now. I have seen companies where the issue of conflict of interest actually ended the life of that company because of the absence of disclosure. In most cases, disclosure cures the question of conflict. But to be honest, in some cases, even if you disclose, ethically, it will not be appropriate, commercially appropriate, to take that step. Move to the next slide. Insider trading. And I like this part, and I want you to please pay some attention to this part. This is one of the most important parts or most important flaws of directors in fulfilling their obligations of the board. And let me give you a scenario. So I sit on the board of a company today, and then Adedumade, who lives abroad, tells me, Tolu, I want to invest in the mining sector in Nigeria. Today, mining is just coming up, so they keep issuing tickets all over the place. I mean, so there are licenses all over the place. But because we are seeing into the future that mining is going to be a big deal, right? I quickly speak, and I see that Adedumade in the UK or in the US wants to hugely invest into my company. I just go and speak to my other directors or get other shareholders, in case where we are director shareholders, to say, look, guys, we are, you know, this market, I'm not really sure what's going on. And I want to limit the exposure, you know, to you guys. And because I want to limit the exposure, I'm happy to buy some of your shares, because the way the company is going, you know, the company might just, business is not coming in. You just give some excuse. And of course, your partners who are already thinking of, look, we're not making enough money from this business, they're happy to transfer their shares to you for a consideration, which is obviously would have been undervalued. Now, you have bought or acquired those shares with the mindset that Adedumade will be investing into this company. What that simply means is that by the time Adedumade invests into the company, the value of the shares would have gone up. And so if your shareholders want to repurchase those shares, they're now buying at a premium. That is huge insider trading, which is really, 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 really frowned out. And so, and it happens in a lot of companies. I've said it's illegal and can result in 2 or 3 cases that we're dealing with. I'm sure you know, a number of you are familiar with some of the big banks that went down. Some of the reasons why they went down had to do with insider trading. It's completely unethical, and it's a no-no. Let me just put it that way. All right, next slide. So that I have 10 more minutes to go before Adedumade reminds me. Concentrated ownerships. Now, this is for fairly large companies, publicly traded companies. In those companies, you discover that, and let me give you a scenario. I don't know whether most of you followed it. I think I followed it to an extent. The Transcorp Holdings, where I think Tony Elumelu holds majority shares there, and this gentleman, or Tedola, you know, was going to purchase it. I don't know how true it is, but I read somewhere that, you know, because Tedola was going to come in, Tony Elumelu, because of the size of the shares he had and the influence he had in the company, you know, purchased more shares. A day or 2 after, his wife also purchased additional shares. Now, I don't know, I've not verified that story, but it's a story that is out there that most of you can read about. So that is some of the problems with publicly traded companies. So sometimes power is concentrated in the hands of a few, and those few, you know, we call them in the UK, when you register a company, and they are called persons with significant interest. And so these persons with significant interest, you know, they can shape the decisions of the company, you know, and direct it, you know, either way. And this is not a good corporate governance practice. Next slide. Thank you. And so finally, I have said I will talk about what I consider to be best practices. I have limited this for now to publicly quoted companies. If we have the opportunity another time, we might be able to look at it at the private level. But for public companies, the role of the CEO and the chairman, they have to be separate. And I have also said that the board should have at least 3 non-executive directors, and 2 of them shall have no financial or personal ties to the executive directors. Again, these are models that are trying, you know, to correct or trying to imbibe what we would have had if we had used the multi-tier structure. But okay, We're using a unitary structure, but we can still infuse this into it. And then I've said the board must have an audit committee composed of non-executive directors. The non-executive directors, you can see it's coming repeatedly here. And the reason is that they are expected, by virtue of their nomination, you will see that there are people who have no particular interest other than the interest of the owners of the company. So any decision other than the decision that will satisfy the objectives of the company, they will not get involved in it. And so this is why they have suggested them to be in the audit company. But again, I'm quick to say that auditors also have specialized skills. So if a non-executive director does not have those kind of skills, you might struggle a little bit. But the whole idea is to ensure that expenditure or expenses of the company are checked and there's transparency and accountability. Next slide. I think we're nearing an end now. I know that time is going. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. Enforcement of it. People have argued, is this soft law? Is it hard law? I've always said, look, what we use is the apply and explain approach. What is important is you want to know that a company has imbibed it, or the company says, I have a corporate governance code of conduct, and which is what the 2018 Code of Corporate Governance, which stipulates. I think for me, the point to note here is not really the enforcement of it by law that is important or that must be important to owners of the company. It is the consequence of not even implementing it at all. And the consequence, as far as I'm concerned, is as it relates to the growth of that company. And so if you do not have it, then it means by natural consequence or defect, you do not want to grow that company. And which quite clearly must be against the principles and the objectives of the business. Yes, the next slide. And I think I have 3 more slides and I'm done. Those 3 slides is just to simply give you, go to the next slide, please. It's just to simply give you scenarios of what we have been talking about. So look at Cadbury. Now, Cadbury had a similar issue sometime ago where they had total breakdown of internal control, of course, which led to financial fraud. The top management overstated in their financial accounts to the tune of 13 billion. Now, when it comes to financial statements, it is not the business of top management. It is the accounts and the auditors that will prepare it. And so you sit on the board, it is submitted to you. Now, because you are running day-to-day operations of the company, you're there. But you see, sometimes those gears, they won't be as visible as when you look at it, on the paper. In that same transaction, that same scenario, they maintained offshore accounts from which they were able to mop up salaries for the EDs. And those who were supposed to check would not check the remuneration fee, because they themselves were also beneficiaries of it. And so the summary of why that issue became so pronounced, that became a big mess, you have past non-executive directors. The problem with that was that those non-executive directors sat in the same room with the EDs when conversations, before it led to all of this, was going on. If we were under the multi-tier structure where you had, the supervisory board and you have the EDs, not have this sort of issue. In this case, they had an audit committee, but it was not effective at all. In fact, I would say it was compromised, ditto for their internal auditor. And we also read that there was collusion between two. It was a potpourri of mess. And so once you have all of that put together, it's difficult, for you to have transparency. And of course, accountability can be part of it. Let's go to the second one. And the last one is one most of you are familiar with. In the stock exchange, I'm sure many of you read about what happened in stock exchange. Now, there's the argument that SEC is a private company, it's not a private company. No, sorry, that's NSE. Yeah, it's NSE. And the assets were held as if they were private properties. And because they thought they were private property, and this is sometimes, the misjudgment of members of the board of directors. So you look at a company because you sit in a big sprawling office on the 13th floor, you believe I own the company. If you are a shareholder director, it's fine. Even as a shareholder director, you are still holding it on behalf of other people. And so once you start looking at yourself as a trustee, then your sense of judgment will be different. They had conflict of interest as contracts. Their external auditors had issues, complete breakdown of corporate governance. It was a complete mess. And the final one was that of First Bank, which is the most recent, which most of you would have read. First Bank was having its own issues. The CBN imposed an MD on them, particularly for the interest of the shareholders. The chairman of the board of directors and some other people, which I will not mention their names, took a slightly different view, partly because the chairman had some loans. They had asked the chairman to start servicing those loans. The value of the assets which he used as collateral for those loans were no longer meeting the value of those loans. And so you had all of these issues. And CBN, through the new MD, was on the case of the chairman. And one Friday evening, it's a mad situation. At Oriental Hotel there, they just removed the MD because the MD was insisting on certain principles. You don't run a company. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much. Thank you for listening. My time is 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
All right. So let me, what will you do? I mean, if we have people in-house to raise questions, please show by hands. If you want to raise it online, please raise your hand. Adaugo Chimamaka. Yes, please go for it.
Thank you very much, sir, for the session. And I wanted to ask everything that you've discussed now. I want to know how a business is like a company, a small one is factored. How would they factor corporate everything you've said in running their companies like startups? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Adaugo. To start with, I think the NGX is now developing, if they have not finished developing it by now itself. I think they're developing also code of conduct for small companies. Particularly their target is as it relates to startup companies. And this is because you see startup companies, particularly the ones in the fintech space, which all of us must be concerned about. Even though they are startup and small companies, they're almost going to be operating as big companies. Because when you look at the different cohorts they are getting themselves into, the sort of funding that is coming into those companies, excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so when these company monies come into the business, how do you satisfy your investor? Now, note this, these investors sometimes are not even shareholders. So that's a different conversation for another day, because you can invest in a company and not take equity in that company. So you just ring-fence that particular asset, and then you expect, your returns out of it. But either way, what you have is, what is the structure? What is the methodology by which these funds that are put into this business, how is it invested? Recently, I was part of Imagine a case which it's public now, Imagine Global. And some of the things that we saw were things you couldn't explain. Not because the matter is in court, not because they were, but you couldn't just explain. And I give my own example. So as an individual, I make some expenses I didn't need to. So for startup companies or for smaller companies, on the one hand, I think there's a code of conduct. I'm sure it's out. I probably will check with my guys and the exchange. I'm sure it's out. But even if it's not out, it's on its way out. But there's nothing wrong in infusing that code of corporate governance into your system. And like I said, forget all the what might appear to be fanciful nomenclatures. All that it means is, first, you must recognize who is in control and who is in charge of operations. Secondly, you must recognize that there must be an infusion of transparency and accountability structures into your system. How that is done is now scalable, depending on the size of the business. If you are, look, when I see a client comes into my office, he says it's a startup company, and then the balance sheet of that client is about $15 million. How are you a startup company? And because you say you're a startup company, you don't have an auditor. So who double checks your expenses? I hope that answers your question.
Yes, we have one more question from you.
But
Yes, please go ahead.
thank you very much for the paper you've delivered. And you delivered it very well. But my question is this: the concept of dependent directors, to my understanding, as the name implies, is to have an independent eye between the NEDs and the executive directors, especially in a unitary system. But if you look at CAMA 2020, I think the number of independent directors have been increased, I think from 1 to 3. Is that an indication that the system is losing confidence in the ability of the audit committee, or probably the NEDs themselves? Or is it a fallout of what has happened in the First Bank, in Cadbury, and so on and so forth? What's your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My response to that is the last points you have made. It's a consequence of what has happened in the market in more recent times. Unfortunately, we're a reactive nation. And so once we are befell or befallen by an incident, we take, and I'm trying to use my words very carefully, we take that incident in isolation, and we quickly, by law, want to make quick amends. Sometimes those amends may, in the short term, deliver the result, but in the long term, they may be inimical to the interest of the growth, either of the company or of the system. And I give you an example that supports this. If you look at what has happened in the extractive industry as well, the P&ID case, which most of you are familiar with, many things have come out from that case. Many of the arbitrators have been questioned, how contracts are negotiated, and their approval layers, approval levels, of those contracts. One of the issues that came up was that, look, it's a company that wants to provide or construct a gas pipeline. The company had no track record. In fact, one of the key players of the company was not a movie star, it was a rock star in a club. Now, before this went through the various layers of approval, who was checking it? Now, it happened and Nigeria lost money. Today, we're working on a
Great, I think you have it back now.
compilation of articles by some of the best arbitrators in Nigeria today. There's really no arbitrator, local and international, of Nigerian origin or descent, who you want to mention, who has not contributed a chapter or contributed a chapter to this book. So for people who are watching or who are participating virtually, this is the book I'm talking about, International Arbitration Law and Practice, The Practitioner's Perspective, edited by Mr. Tolu Aderemi. He also has a couple of articles as well in the book, and it is going for only 10,000 naira. It is available on our online store at legonigeria.com, and is also available for people who are attending the training here in person. So, sir, we have you back online. I don't know if you'd like to say a word or two about the book, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Well, thank you. I can hear you. I can hear you. Thank you very much, Adedumade, and thank you for the opportunity to join the class. It's always good to share. Is what I call knowledge exchange. But I'm also happy that you also put the book out there, which incidentally, Adedumade might have been trying to be humble about it. His company is actually the publishers of the book. And they did quite a very good job about the book. For me, I say that the book is one of the best texts in Nigeria today, and even abroad. Not because I edited it, but because of the substance and the content of it. You know, it's a practice book which every arbitrator or intending arbitrator should have. And Adedumade, if you will let me, I always like to encourage industry. I will, as a small gesture, donate 2 copies of that book to the 2 persons that, okay, now 3. There's a lady online, Chi Mamaka. So please let the 3, my first customer, the lady who was sitting down, I suspect she came late.
All right. Wow.
And then my friend at the back in the gray suit, and then Chimamaka. So please let them give you their details, and please send it to me. My office will dispatch a copy each of the books to their respective offices. Otherwise, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.
Guys, a round of applause for Mr. Aderemi. No, trust me, it blows my mind like that all the time. Sir, it's been an honor to have you. He wished to be here in person, but his schedule is so busy. In fact, I think he pulled himself out from so many things just to take this training today. Thank you so very much. We really appreciate it. And I can see that many people online are saying thank you as well. It shows that everybody has enjoyed your session. Thank you so much. We've learned a lot. And I hope that as we have learned what we have learned today, we don't just hear it and don't apply it, but we take it back to our clients. We use it to service them better, and also we use it to improve our knowledge. Everybody who has attended both physically in class and online will get a copy of the material this evening. So the schedule for the trainings we had today, please look into your mail later today. You'll get all the slides from the training. Tomorrow as well, you're going to get all the slides. And after the training, you're going to get video recordings of the session, so you can watch them at your leisure in case you miss 1 or 2 things at some point in time. Thank you so very much, Mr. Tolu. We'll release you now. And of course, I'll be sure to call you after the session. Thank you so much, sir. We're most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I wish everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, guys. So we are continuing our